You know you have potential, but you feel powerless when it matters most in crucial moments. Your confidence crumbles, and you watch stronger personalities dominate the room. Every important conversation becomes a battle you're losing before. You even speak, while others seem to possess an unshakable inner strength that commands respect wherever they go. I am Sun Tzu, the ancient strategist who discovered that true strength isn't about force. It's about understanding the invisible powers that make some people unstoppable while others remain forever weak. What I learned about inner fortification and strategic self-mastery will transform you from someone who feels powerless into someone who cannot be moved, using the same principles that have made warriors and leaders invincible for over 2,500 years. The battlefield may have changed from ancient China to modern life, but the foundations of unshakable strength remain as powerful today as they were when I first discovered them. But first, like this video, subscribe for more ancient wisdom that builds modern warriors, and comment below where you're watching from. I want to know which corner of the world is ready to become truly unstoppable. Let me share with you the moment I realized that everything I thought I knew about strength was wrong. I was not born into power or privilege. I entered the royal court as a young man with nothing but ambition and a burning desire to prove myself. Like you, I felt the crushing weight of powerlessness when faced with those who seemed naturally commanding, effortlessly respected, inherently strong. In those early days, I believed strength meant speaking the loudest, appearing the most confident, never showing doubt or vulnerability. I watched the established generals dominate conversations with their booming voices and aggressive postures. I tried to mimic them, to project the same forceful energy. But every attempt made me appear more foolish, more desperate, more obviously weak. The moment that changed everything came during my first military council meeting. I had prepared extensively, memorizing every detail of troop movements and supply logistics. When the time came to present my analysis, I stood tall, raised my voice, and delivered what I thought was a commanding presentation. The room fell silent, not in respect, but in uncomfortable embarrassment for my obvious overcompensation. General Wei, a man whose quiet presence commanded more respect than any shouting ever could, simply said, "Young son, the river that makes the most noise carries the least water." His words cut through me like a blade, but in that cutting, I found clarity. I realized I was fighting a battle I could never win, because I was fighting on the wrong battlefield entirely. That night, I took a cracked clay tablet, one of my first attempts at recording military wisdom, and I wrote these words: "True strength whispers, while weakness shouts." I studied that broken tablet for hours, seeing in its fractured surface a reflection of my own understanding. Just as this tablet was imperfect, but still capable of holding wisdom, I too could be flawed and still possess power. I began observing differently. I watched General Wei in subsequent meetings, noting how he never raised his voice, yet everyone leaned in to hear him speak. I studied how he positioned himself, not at the head of the table, where he might appear desperate for attention, but slightly to the side, where he could observe everyone while remaining quietly central to every decision. Most importantly, I discovered that the generals and advisors who truly held influence were those who understood something fundamental. Strength is not about what you display, it's about what you control. They controlled information, controlled timing, controlled the flow of conversations and decisions. They had learned to fight internal battles first, mastering themselves before attempting to master others. I realized that my feelings of powerlessness weren't a character flaw, they were valuable intelligence about where I needed to build genuine strength. Every moment of weakness was actually a map showing me exactly where my true power was waiting to be developed. This revelation became the foundation of everything I would later teach about warfare and strategy. The same principles that transformed a desperate young man in the royal court into a master strategist, could transform anyone willing to understand that real strength operates according to laws most people never discover. The greatest discovery of my life was understanding the difference between appearing strong and being strong. Most people spend their entire lives perfecting an illusion, while their actual power remains dormant, undeveloped, untapped. I learned this lesson through observing Prince Zhao, a man who wore authority like a magnificent crown but possessed no real power beneath it. He commanded through intimidation, demanded respect through fear, and projected strength through volume and aggression. To the untrained eye, he appeared formidable, broad shoulders thrown back, voice booming across rooms, quick to anger and quicker to threaten. But I watched him closely and discovered something remarkable. His displays of strength were actually admissions of weakness. Every raised voice was evidence that his words alone carried no weight. Every threat revealed his lack of genuine influence. Every aggressive posture betrayed his deep insecurity about his actual position. The hollow crown he wore, magnificent, gold that was actually painted clay, became my perfect metaphor for false power. Beautiful from a distance, impressive to those who didn't look closely, but fragile and worthless when examined by anyone with real understanding. I witnessed his downfall during a critical military decision. When faced with genuine opposition from seasoned commanders, his bluster collapsed instantly. His threats meant nothing to men who had faced real danger. His intimidation tactics backfired against those who understood actual combat. In moments of true pressure, his false strength crumbled like the clay crown it had always been. This taught me that noise is the enemy of authority. The person who must constantly prove their strength is advertising their weakness. True power operates in silence because it doesn't need validation. It simply is. Real strength, I discovered, works through influence rather than force. It guides rather than commands. It attracts rather than demands. When you possess genuine power, people want to follow you, want to please you, want to align themselves with your vision. You don't need to chase respect because it flows to you naturally. I began studying those who possessed this authentic strength. They spoke less but were heard more. They made fewer demands but received greater compliance. They showed vulnerability when appropriate, which paradoxically made them appear more trustworthy and therefore more powerful. The most shocking revelation was that admitting weakness in specific areas actually increased their overall strength. By acknowledging limitations honestly, they freed themselves from the exhausting performance of pretending to be perfect. This honesty created space for genuine growth and made others more willing to support them. I realized that most people remain weak not because they lack potential, but because they're investing all their energy in maintaining an illusion instead of building reality. They're so busy appearing strong that they never develop actual strength. They're performing power instead of cultivating it. This understanding revolutionized my approach to everything. Instead of trying to appear formidable, I focused on becoming formidable. Instead of demanding respect, I built respectability. Instead of projecting confidence, I developed competence that naturally generated confidence. The invisible strength that emerges from this approach cannot be challenged because it isn't performance, it's substance. And substance, unlike illusion, grows stronger under pressure rather than weaker. If I could give you only one principle that would transform your life from weakness to unstoppable strength, it would be this: know yourself with the same precision a master craftsman knows his tools. The foundation of all strategic advantage, all genuine power, all lasting strength begins with ruthless self-awareness. Most people fear this journey because they prefer comfortable lies to uncomfortable truths. They would rather maintain pleasant illusions about their capabilities than face the honest assessment that makes real growth possible. But I learned that the scale of truth, that ancient bronze scale that weighs character rather than gold, reveals that knowing your weaknesses is the first step to eliminating them. Let me tell you about the practice that changed everything for me. Before my first major independent command, I spent 7 days conducting what I called the inventory of self. I listed every emotional trigger that could cloud my judgment, every fear that might paralyze my decision-making, every pride point that enemies could exploit, every limitation that might become a vulnerability. This wasn't an exercise in self-criticism. It was strategic intelligence gathering. I catalogued my tendency to overthink when facing time pressure. I identified my weakness for seeking approval from authority figures. I recognized my pattern of becoming rigid when plans changed unexpectedly. I mapped my emotional reactions to criticism, failure, and unexpected success. Most importantly, I studied my decision-making patterns under stress. I discovered that when threatened, I defaulted to either aggressive confrontation or complete withdrawal, neither of which served strategic purposes. When frustrated, I became impatient and made hasty choices. When praised, I became overconfident and stopped paying attention to crucial details. This brutal honesty felt devastating at first, but it became the foundation of my greatest strength. By knowing exactly where my weaknesses lay, I could guard against them. By understanding my emotional patterns, I could anticipate and manage my reactions. By acknowledging my limitations, I could compensate for them or eliminate them entirely. The practice revealed something profound. Most of my perceived weaknesses were actually misdirected strengths. My tendency to overthink became strategic planning. When properly channeled, my sensitivity to criticism became valuable feedback processing. My caution became tactical patience. My desire for approval became motivation for excellence. I developed a daily practice of honest self-assessment, asking myself 3 questions every evening. What did I do well today, and why? What did I do poorly today, and what caused it? What pattern am I seeing in my behavior that serves me or limits me? This practice eliminated the blind spots that make people vulnerable. When you know yourself completely, others cannot surprise you with revelations about your character. When you understand your patterns, you can predict and control your responses. When you acknowledge your limitations, you can work around them or transcend them. Most people remain weak because they lie to themselves about their capabilities, their motivations, and their patterns. They make the same mistakes repeatedly because they refuse to see the patterns that create those mistakes. They become predictable to their enemies because they don't understand their own predictability. But when you know yourself with complete honesty, you become incredibly difficult to defeat. Your enemies cannot exploit weaknesses you've already identified and addressed. They cannot manipulate emotions you understand and control. They cannot predict responses you've consciously chosen rather than unconsciously defaulted to. Becomes your ultimate strategic advantage because it transforms every weakness into either a strength or a neutralized vulnerability. The most dangerous enemy you will ever face is not external. It lives within your own mind, wearing the terrifying mask of your fears, doubts, and limiting beliefs. I learned this truth during my first independent command, when I discovered that the battle for my soldiers' confidence had to begin with the battle for my own. I was 28 years old, given command of 3,000 men to defend a strategic mountain pass. The responsibility felt crushing. Every decision could mean life or death for thousands. Every mistake could lead to catastrophe. As I stood in my tent the night before the enemy's expected arrival, I felt something I had never experienced before, doubt that seemed to freeze my very soul. The demon mask of fear showed me vivid images of failure, my men slaughtered because of my inexperience, my name remembered as the fool who lost the pass, my family dishonored by my incompetence. These thoughts circled in my mind like vultures, growing stronger with each repetition, until I found myself questioning every aspect of my preparation. But in that moment of deepest fear, I had a revelation that changed everything. I realized that fear was not my enemy, it was information. My terror was actually my mind's way of identifying exactly what I needed to address to ensure success. Each fearful thought pointed to a specific area where I needed better preparation, clearer planning, or stronger backup systems. I developed what I called the interrogation of fear. Instead of trying to banish fearful thoughts, I questioned them systematically. When fear whispered, "What if your strategy fails?" I asked what would make it more likely to succeed. When doubt suggested, "You're too inexperienced for this," I asked, what experience do I have that applies, and what additional knowledge do I need? This practice transformed anxiety into strategic thinking. Every worry became a planning prompt. Every doubt became a question that demanded a solution. Instead of being paralyzed by the magnitude of possible failures, I became energized by the clarity of necessary preparations. I discovered that courage is not the absence of fear, it's the transformation of fear into useful action. The bravest warriors I knew were not fearless. They were skilled at converting fear energy into preparation energy, doubt energy into planning energy, anxiety energy into focus energy. That night, I created my daily practice for conquering the inner enemy. Each morning, I would identify the fear or doubt that felt strongest, then spend focused time developing specific strategies to address what that fear was trying to tell me. If I feared making wrong decisions under pressure, I practiced rapid decision-making with small stakes. If I doubted my ability to inspire men, I studied the speeches and behaviors of leaders who moved others powerfully. Most people remain weak because they fight against their fears instead of learning from them. They waste energy trying to eliminate anxiety instead of using anxiety as motivation for better preparation. They treat doubt as evidence of inadequacy instead of treating it as intelligence about what needs attention. But when you master the ability to interrogate your inner resistance, you discover that your biggest fears often point to your greatest opportunities for growth. Your mind's resistance becomes your guide to exactly where your next breakthrough is waiting. The very thoughts that once weakened you become the pathway to making you unstoppable. The enemy within transforms from destroyer to teacher when you learn to listen to its intelligence while refusing to accept its verdicts. The mountain stone I keep as a reminder taught me the most fundamental lesson about power. Where you position yourself determines whether you win or lose before the contest even begins. Most people remain weak not because they lack ability, but because they consistently choose disadvantageous positions and then wonder why they struggle. I learned this principle during what should have been my first military defeat. Enemy forces outnumbered my army 3-1, with superior equipment and more experienced commanders. Every traditional analysis suggested certain failure, but I had something they didn't. I understood that the right position could overcome overwhelming disadvantages. Instead of meeting them on the open plains where their numbers would dominate, I positioned my forces on elevated ground near a narrow valley entrance. This wasn't just about physical elevation, it was about understanding how position creates power in every dimension. From higher ground, my archers could strike effectively while remaining protected. The narrow passage meant their numerical advantage became irrelevant because they could only attack with a fraction of their force at any time. But the real breakthrough came when I realized that positioning isn't just about where you about when you choose to engage, how you control the flow of events, and what options you preserve for yourself while limiting options for others. Physical positioning is the most obvious application, but weak people constantly position themselves poorly in social and professional situations. They arrive late to important meetings, giving others time to establish agendas. They sit where they can't see everyone's reactions or where their own presence isn't optimally felt. They speak first when they should listen, or remain silent when they should lead the conversation. Psychological positioning matters even more. Strong people position themselves as problem solvers rather than problem creators, as resources rather than burdens, as collaborators rather than competitors. They establish themselves as indispensable before conflicts arise, making opposition costly for others to consider. I developed what I call the positioning audit, a systematic evaluation of where I stood in every important relationship and situation. Was I positioned as someone others needed, or someone who needed others? Did I have multiple options available, or was I trapped with limited choices? Could I see clearly what was happening around me, or was I operating with restricted vision? The most powerful positioning principle I discovered is this: always maintain multiple exit strategies and advancement paths. Weak people put themselves in positions where they have only one option. They depend entirely on one job, one relationship, one plan, one source of power. When that single option is threatened, they become desperate and therefore weak. Strong positioning means never being trapped by circumstances. It means creating situations where you have leverage, while others need your cooperation. It means positioning yourself where opportunities flow to you naturally, rather than having to chase them desperately. In my mountain pass victory, positioning gave me every advantage: clear vision of enemy movements, protected lines of communication, natural defensive benefits, and multiple retreat routes if needed. The enemy, despite their superior numbers, found themselves funneled into a disadvantageous position where their strengths became irrelevant. This same principle applies to every situation in your life. Position yourself where your strengths are most relevant and your weaknesses least exposed. Position yourself where you can see clearly and act decisively. Position yourself where others need you more than you need them. Master positioning, and you'll never fight from weakness again. The water clock that measured not hours but perfect moments taught me that timing transforms ordinary actions into extraordinary results. Most people remain weak because they act at the wrong time, rushing when they should be patient, hesitating when they should strike, forcing situations that need time to develop naturally. I learned this lesson through what appeared to be my greatest failure, but became my most valuable education. Enemy forces had surrounded our position, and my generals urged immediate action. We must break out now before they complete their encirclement, they argued. Every instinct screamed for movement, for action, for doing something rather than seemingly nothing. But I had observed something they missed: subtle signs that the enemy's supplies were becoming strained, small indicators that their morale was wavering, tiny cracks in their coordination that suggested internal pressures. The water clock of opportunity had not yet reached the perfect moment, so I waited for 3 months. We endured siege conditions while my own officers questioned my resolve. They interpreted patience as indecision, strategic waiting as weakness, careful observation as paralysis. The pressure to act grew daily, but I had learned to distinguish between pressure from circumstances and pressure from impatience. The breakthrough came when enemy scouts began returning with less frequency, when their patrol patterns became irregular, when smoke from their camps suggested reduced cooking fires. These signs told me their resources were nearly exhausted. Their confidence was eroding, their unity was fracturing. The perfect moment had arrived. When we finally moved, the enemy collapsed within hours. What would have been a costly battle of attrition 3 months earlier became a swift, decisive victory because I had waited for the right moment rather than forcing the wrong one. This experience taught me the difference between patience and procrastination. Procrastination is waiting because you're afraid to act. Patience is waiting because you understand that acting now would be less effective than acting later. Procrastination weakens your position over time. Strategic patience strengthens it. Developed a practice of reading what I call the signs of ripeness, indicators that tell you when situations are ready for action. In warfare, these might be supply shortages, communication gaps, or morale problems. In personal situations, These might be changing attitudes, shifting priorities, or emerging opportunities. The strongest people I've known possess what appears to be supernatural timing, but it's actually the result of careful observation and patient preparation. They seem to know exactly when to speak and when to remain silent, when to push and when to yield, when to reveal their capabilities and when to conceal them. Most people rush because they fear missing opportunities, but premature action often destroys the very opportunities they're trying to capture. Others hesitate because they fear making mistakes, but excessive delay can be as costly as premature action. The art lies in developing the ability to sense when the moment is right, when all factors have aligned to maximize your chances of success, while minimizing your risks. This requires both the patience to wait for optimal conditions and the decisiveness to act when those conditions arrive. Master timing, and you'll find that even modest efforts produce remarkable results when applied at exactly the right moment. The shadow puppet that casts complex shadows from simple movements taught me that the greatest strength is the strength others never see coming. Most people exhaust themselves trying to demonstrate their power, but true masters understand that concealed capability is infinitely more powerful than displayed capability. I discovered this principle during a conflict where I was vastly outmatched in every measurable way. My enemy commanded more troops, possessed superior weapons, controlled better territory, and had far more experience. By every conventional assessment, I should have been crushed quickly and decisively, but I had something he didn't expect: ability to control what he thought he knew about me. Instead of trying to appear stronger than I was, I deliberately appeared weaker. I allowed him to capture intelligence, suggesting my forces were demoralized, my supplies were running low, and my strategy was confused. I positioned my strongest units where they appeared to be retreating in disorder. I sent communications I knew he would intercept, painting a picture of an army on the verge of collapse. But this wasn't simply lying, it was strategic truth management. Everything I allowed him to discover was technically accurate from certain perspectives. My forces were indeed concerned about the odds against us. Our supplies were limited compared to his abundance. Our strategy did appear confusing because he could only see part of it. The key was understanding that deception isn't about creating false information, it's about controlling which true information others have access to and how they interpret it. I gave him accurate details that led to completely wrong conclusions. When he attacked what he believed was my weakest point, he discovered it was actually my strongest. When he pursued what appeared to be my retreating forces, he found himself drawn into a carefully prepared trap. When he committed his reserves to what seemed like a certain victory, he realized too late that he had been fighting shadows while my real strength remained hidden. This taught me that appearing weak when you are strong is the ultimate strategic advantage. It causes enemies to underestimate you, to make careless mistakes, to commit resources against phantom threats while missing real dangers. It makes them overconfident, which leads to poor decision-making and inadequate preparation. But ethical deception requires clear boundaries. I never created false information about matters of life and death outside of warfare. I never deceived allies or innocents. I never used misdirection to harm those who trusted me. Strategic deception was a tool for overcoming those who intended harm, not for exploiting those who offered friendship in personal development. This principle means controlling what others think they know about your capabilities, your intentions, and your resources. It means not revealing your full hand until the moment is right for maximum impact. It means allowing others to underestimate you while you quietly build overwhelming advantages. The most powerful people I've known rarely discussed their full capabilities, their complete plans, or their total resources. They allowed others to make assumptions, often wrong assumptions, that worked to their advantage. They understood that mystery creates respect, while transparency often invites exploitation. This doesn't mean being dishonest. It means being strategically selective about what you reveal and when. It means understanding that your enemy's wrong assumptions about you can become your greatest weapons, while your friend's correct understanding of you becomes your greatest source of support. Master this invisible sword, and you'll find that many battles end before they begin, won by positioning rather than force. The arrow of commitment that cannot be recalled once released taught me that hesitation is the enemy of all power. Most people remain weak because they spend their lives preparing to act rather than acting, planning to decide rather than deciding, getting ready to commit rather than committing. I learned this lesson during what became known as the Battle of Swift Rivers, where speed of execution determined everything. Enemy reinforcements were marching toward a strategic city that once reinforced would become impossible to capture. I had perhaps 18 hours to take the city before those reinforcements arrived, and changed the entire balance of power in the region. My advisors wanted more time to plan, more intelligence about defenses, more certainty about outcomes. General, they said, we need at least 3 days to properly assess the situation and develop a comprehensive strategy. But I understood something they didn't. Sometimes the perfect plan executed too late is infinitely worse than a good plan executed immediately. The moment I committed to the attack, everything accelerated. Orders flowed rapidly to unit commanders. Troops moved with decisive purpose. Supply lines activated with focused efficiency. The entire army transformed from a deliberating body into a striking force, because one clear decision had been made. What my advisors couldn't see was that I had been preparing for exactly this kind of rapid decision for months. Every day, I practiced making tactical choices quickly with limited information. I studied historical examples of successful rapid campaigns. I developed systems that could be activated instantly when speed became essential. The arrow had been perfectly crafted long before it needed to be released. We took the city in 14 hours. When enemy reinforcements arrived, they found our flags flying from the walls and our defenses already established. What would have been a prolonged siege became an impossible assault for them. Speed had transformed a difficult situation into a dominant position. This experience revealed that speed and decisiveness create their own momentum. Once you commit fully to a course of action, resources and opportunities begin aligning to support that action. People respond to decisive leadership. Circumstances bend to accommodate clear intention. Momentum builds upon itself until what seemed impossible becomes inevitable. But speed without preparation is recklessness, just as preparation without speed is paralysis. The key is developing what I call instant readiness, the ability to move from decision to action without the delays that allow opportunities to escape or opposition to organize. Most people hesitate because they fear making wrong decisions. But I discovered that making swift decisions and adjusting them based on results is almost always superior to making slow decisions and hoping they're perfect. Speed allows you to test reality quickly and adapt accordingly. Hesitation allows others to seize advantages while you're still deliberating. I developed a practice of making important decisions within strict time limits. For tactical choices, I allowed myself no more than the time it takes to draw 3 deep breaths. For strategic choices, no more than 1 day of focused consideration. For life-changing choices, no more than 1 week of evaluation. This forced me to trust my preparation, trust my judgment, and trust my ability to adjust course when necessary. It eliminated the paralysis that comes from seeking impossible certainty, and the weakness that comes from allowing others to act while you're still planning. Master decisive action, and you'll find that bold moves create their own success through the power of committed momentum. The Riverstone, smooth and shaped by centuries of flowing water, taught me that the most unstoppable force in nature is also the most flexible. Water destroys the hardest rocks, not through force, but through persistent adaptability around obstacles, finding new paths, always moving toward its destination, regardless of what stands in its way. I discovered this principle during a campaign where everything that could go wrong did go wrong. Our planned route was blocked by floods. Our expected allies switched sides. Our intelligence proved completely inaccurate. Our supply lines were cut by unexpected enemy movements. According to our original strategy, we should have retreated immediately and regrouped for another attempt months later. But I had been studying water's behavior during the rainy season, watching how streams respond when their paths are blocked. Water doesn't fight the boulder. Water doesn't fight the boulder, it flows around it. It doesn't struggle against the dam, it finds another channel or rises above it. It doesn't resist change, embraces change as its fundamental nature. Instead of seeing these setbacks as failures of planning, I began seeing them as information about new possibilities. The blocked route forced us to discover a better path that our enemies hadn't anticipated. The switched allies revealed their unreliability before we depended on them in critical moments. The inaccurate intelligence taught us to verify everything and depend on our own observations. Most importantly, the severed supply lines forced us to live off the land and move faster than anyone expected, turning a logistical disadvantage into a strategic advantage. By the time our enemies realized where we were, we had already achieved objectives they thought were impossible given our apparent limitations. This experience taught me that rigid people break under pressure, while flexible people become stronger. When you're committed to one specific method of achieving your goals, any disruption to that method feels like defeat. But when you're committed to the goal itself, while remaining flexible about methods, every obstacle becomes an opportunity to discover better approaches. I developed what I call the water principle, maintaining absolute clarity about destination, while maintaining complete flexibility about the journey. Water never loses sight of its ultimate direction, but it never fights unnecessarily against temporary obstacles. It simply finds another way. The strongest people I've known share this quality. They have unshakable core principles that never bend, but infinite tactical flexibility in how they apply those principles. They're like water in their ability to take the shape of any container while never losing their essential nature. When facing opposition, they don't meet force with force. They redirect force or flow around it. When encountering unexpected obstacles, they don't waste energy on frustration. They immediately begin seeking alternative paths. When plans change, they don't mourn the old plan, they embrace the new possibilities. This doesn't mean being weak or directionless. Water is incredibly powerful precisely because it's so adaptable. It carves canyons, moves mountains, and shapes continents through its persistent, flexible flow. It's unstoppable not because it's hard, but because it's impossible to stop something that can take any form and flow through any opening. Most people become weak when circumstances change because they've confused their methods with their goals. They've become so attached to specific approaches that they can't see alternative routes to the same destinations. They fight reality instead of working with it. Master adaptability, and you become like water, impossible to trap, impossible to stop, always moving toward your objectives, regardless of what obstacles appear in your path. The focused lens that concentrates scattered sunlight into fire taught me that unified energy creates power beyond the sum of its parts. Most people remain weak because their efforts are scattered across multiple directions, their attention divided among competing priorities, their energy dissipated through conflicting desires and contradictory goals. I learned this principle while commanding what appeared to be the most hopeless force I ever led, an army of conscripts from different regions, speaking different dialects, following different customs, motivated by different loyalties. They had been thrown together hastily to face a crisis, with no shared history, no common identity, no unified purpose beyond survival. Initially, they fought like separate armies that happened to occupy the same battlefield. The mountain men used tactics that contradicted the plains dwellers' strategies. The cavalry pursued objectives that undermined the infantry's positions. Each unit optimized for its own success, while accidentally sabotaging the collective effort. But I observed something remarkable when our position came under direct attack. In that moment of shared danger, all the differences became irrelevant. Suddenly, every soldier had the same goal: survival and victory. The mountain men's knowledge of terrain helped the plains dwellers' position effectively. The cavalry's mobility supported the infantry's defensive strength. Individual competencies aligned into collective power. That's when I understood that the lens principle applies to both groups and individuals. Just as scattered light is merely illumination, but focused light becomes laser capable of cutting through steel. Scattered effort is merely activity, but focused effort becomes unstoppable force. I began systematically creating unity of purpose within my forces. Instead of trying to eliminate their differences, I showed them how their diverse strengths could serve one overarching objective. I helped them see that their individual success depended completely on collective success, and that collective success required each person to contribute their unique capabilities. The transformation was extraordinary. The same conscripts who had stumbled over each other in confusion began moving like a single, intelligent organism. Commands flowed smoothly because everyone understood how their roles supported the unified mission. Resources were shared efficiently because hoarding hurt the common cause that benefited everyone. This principle applies even more powerfully to your personal development. Most people have multiple competing goals that cancel each other out. They want financial success and complete leisure. They want physical fitness and indulgent eating. They want meaningful relationships and total independence. They want recognition and privacy. These internal conflicts create the mental civil wars that drain all your power. I developed what I call the alignment audit, a systematic examination of whether all my goals, values, and actions pointed toward the same destination. I discovered that many of my apparent desires were actually distractions from my core purpose. Some goals that seemed important were actually ways of avoiding the work required for what truly mattered. The breakthrough came when I identified my single overarching purpose: becoming an undefeatable strategist who could protect those I cared about and serve the greater good. Once this became clear, every decision became simpler. Does this action move me toward that purpose or away from it? Does this opportunity strengthen my strategic capabilities or dilute them? When you achieve true unity of purpose, several things happen simultaneously. Decision-making becomes faster because you have clear criteria for evaluation. Energy increases because you're not wasting power on conflicting directions. Momentum builds because all your efforts compound rather than cancel each other out. Master unified purpose, and you become like focused sunlight, capable of achieving what seemed impossible through the concentrated application of your complete power. The spy's jade ring with its hidden compartments taught me that information is the ultimate weapon and ignorance is the ultimate weakness. Most people stumble through life making decisions based on assumptions, rumors, and incomplete pictures, then wonder why their choices lead to disappointment and failure. I discovered this principle during what should have been a routine territorial dispute that nearly became my greatest defeat. I had relied on conventional intelligence reports from scouts, information from local contacts, assessments from my officers. Everything suggested a straightforward engagement against a competent but unremarkable opponent. But I had failed to penetrate beneath the surface of apparent facts. What I thought was a simple border conflict was actually an elaborate trap designed by three allied enemies working in coordination. What appeared to be a single force was actually the visible portion of a much larger strategic operation. What seemed like predictable tactics was actually careful. Misdirection, concealing, revolutionary. New approaches. My first clue came from something so subtle that most commanders would have ignored it. The timing of enemy supply movements didn't match their apparent troop numbers. This small discrepancy suggested either hidden forces or deceptive information. I immediately initiated what I called the deep investigation, systematically questioning every assumption I had made about the situation. I sent my most trusted agents not just to gather information about enemy positions and plans, but to understand the relationships, motivations, and hidden agendas driving those plans. I needed to know not just what they were doing, but why they were doing it, who was really making decisions, and what they hoped to achieve beyond the obvious objectives. The intelligence that saved us came from an unexpected source, a merchant, who had noticed unusual purchasing patterns in 3 different regions. Someone was buying specific supplies in quantities that only made sense if multiple forces were coordinating for a much larger operation than anything publicly acknowledged. This taught me that real intelligence isn't just about collecting facts, it's about understanding patterns, motivations, and hidden connections that reveal the complete picture. Surface information tells you what's happening. Deep intelligence tells you why it's happening and what's likely to happen next. I developed a systematic approach to information gathering that served me throughout my career. First, identify what I needed to know versus what I merely wanted to know. Second, determine which sources could provide that information and how to access them without revealing my interests. Third, verify critical information through multiple independent sources. Fourth, analyze not just the information itself, but the patterns and motivations behind it. Most importantly, I learned to distinguish between data and actionable intelligence. Data is raw information. Intelligence is processed understanding that enables better decisions. You can have enormous amounts of data and still make terrible choices if you haven't transformed that data into genuine insight. The strongest people I've known are always the best informed. They don't make assumptions when they can discover facts. They don't rely on single sources when they can verify through multiple channels. They don't accept surface explanations when they can understand deeper motivations. But they also understand that perfect information is impossible and waiting for complete certainty is paralysis. The art lies in gathering enough reliable intelligence to make good decisions while remaining alert to new information that might require adjusting those decisions. This principle applies to every area of life. Before making career decisions, understand not just job descriptions, but company cultures, industry trends, and hidden challenges. Before forming relationships, understand not just what people say, but what their actions reveal about their true priorities and character. Master information gathering, and you'll make decisions based on reality rather than illusion, giving you enormous advantages over those who operate on assumptions and wishful thinking. The puppet master's invisible strings taught me that the strongest victories happen in minds before they ever manifest in reality. Most people exhaust themselves trying to force compliance through pressure and threats, never understanding that willing cooperation is infinitely more powerful than reluctant obedience. I learned this principle during a siege that lasted 18 months, not because the city was impregnable, but because I was conducting an experiment in psychological strategy. I could have taken the city by force within weeks, but I wanted to understand whether it was possible to achieve complete victory without bloodshed, to win so thoroughly that resistance became psychologically impossible. Instead of attacking walls, I attacked assumptions. Instead of breaking gates, I broke the enemy's certainty about their position. Instead of depleting their supplies, I depleted their confidence in their leaders and their cause. The first phase involved demonstrating that I understood their situation better than they did. I sent messages that revealed intimate knowledge of their internal discussions, their resource levels, their morale problems, their strategic concerns. This wasn't about showing off, it was about establishing that I saw everything, knew everything, anticipated everything. The psychological impact was immediate. When people realize their enemy understands their situation completely, doubt begins, undermining their confidence. They start questioning their own plans, second-guessing their own leaders, wondering what other information their opponent possesses. The second phase involved creating cognitive dissonance about their chances of success. I demonstrated overwhelming force during carefully orchestrated displays, then immediately withdrew to show I wasn't using that force only because I chose not to, not because I couldn't. This established that their survival depended entirely on my restraint rather than their defenses. The third phase was the most crucial, offering a path to victory that aligned with their deepest values and interests. Instead of demanding surrender, I proposed an alliance that would give them everything they truly wanted while eliminating what they actually feared. I transformed their perception of me from destroyer to protector, from enemy to essential ally. The city opened its gates and invited me in as a liberator. The same people who had been prepared to die fighting me became enthusiastic supporters of the vision I offered. No one died, no property was destroyed, no lasting resentments were created. Complete victory through psychological transformation, rather than physical force. This experience taught me that perception shapes reality more than facts do. People respond to what they believe is true more than to what actually is true. If you can change how someone thinks about a situation, you've changed the situation itself. I developed what I call the influence sequence, a systematic approach to psychological positioning. First, demonstrate superior understanding of the other person's situation and motivations. Second, establish that you possess capabilities they cannot effectively counter. Third, show that your success serves their interests better than continued resistance does. This isn't manipulation in the harmful sense. It's strategic communication that reveals genuine alignments of interest that weren't previously visible. The strongest influence comes from helping others. See how cooperation with your objectives actually helps them achieve their own goals more effectively. Most people try to win through logical arguments or emotional pressure, but the deepest influence happens when you change the framework within which others understand their choices. Instead of convincing them that your option is better than their option, you show them that your option actually is their option. Viewed from a broader perspective, master psychological positioning, and you'll find that most conflicts dissolve into collaborations once people understand the true nature of their situation and interests. The merchant's abacus that turns complex calculations into simple decisions taught me that efficient use of resources creates power, while waste creates weakness. Most people believe that having more resources makes them stronger, but I learned that knowing how to maximize whatever resources you have makes you unstoppable regardless of limitations. I discovered this principle during what became known as the Campaign of Impossible Logistics. I was tasked with defending a remote frontier region with half the troops normally required, 1/3 the usual supplies, and no possibility of reinforcement for 6 months. According to conventional military thinking, the mission was suicide. But constraints force innovation in ways that abundance never does. When you have unlimited resources, you become lazy in your thinking, wasteful in your methods, inefficient in your execution. When resources are scarce, every decision matters. Every asset must be maximized. Every opportunity must be captured. I began by conducting what I called the efficiency audit, a systematic analysis of how every resource was being used and how that use could be optimized. I discovered that we were following standard procedures designed for standard situations, but our situation was anything but standard. Food supplies, that were allocated based on peacetime consumption patterns could be stretched significantly by adjusting meal timing and composition without reducing nutrition or morale. Weapons maintenance schedules designed for heavy combat could be modified for our defensive strategy without compromising readiness. Personnel assignments based on traditional roles could be reorganized to multiply individual effectiveness. Most importantly, I realized that our greatest untapped resource was the intelligence and creativity of my soldiers themselves. Instead of treating them as simple executors of orders, I engaged them as strategic partners in solving our resource challenges. They knew things about efficiency and innovation that no manual could teach. A cavalry officer suggested using horses for supply transport during non-combat periods, doubling our logistics capacity. An engineer proposed modifications to our defensive positions that reduced material requirements by 40% while increasing defensive effectiveness. A quartermaster developed a rotation system that made our limited equipment serve twice as many people. The breakthrough came when I stopped thinking about scarcity as a disadvantage and started seeing it as intelligence about what really mattered. Constraints revealed which activities were essential and which were merely traditional. Limitations forced us to distinguish between what we needed and what we merely wanted. We not only successfully defended the region, we did it so efficiently that we had surplus resources at the end of the campaign. Our constraint-driven innovations proved superior to standard abundance-based approaches. We accomplished more with less because we had been forced to think better. This experience taught me that resource management is ultimately about strategic thinking applied to practical constraints. The goal isn't to accumulate maximum resources, it's to achieve maximum results with whatever resources you have available. I developed a systematic approach to resource optimization that served me throughout my career. First, identify what you're actually trying to accomplish versus what you think you should be doing. Second, determine the minimum resources required to achieve those objectives. Third, find ways to make those resources serve multiple purposes simultaneously. Fourth, eliminate everything that doesn't directly contribute to your essential goals. Most people remain weak because they waste their energy, time, attention, and opportunities on activities that feel important but don't actually advance their objectives. They confuse being busy with being effective, confuse having resources with using resources well. Master resource efficiency, and you'll find that limitations become competitive advantages when properly understood and strategically applied. The diplomatic seal that opens doors and forges unbreakable bonds taught me that no one becomes unstoppable alone, but wrong alliances make you weaker than isolation. Most people either try to do everything independently, limiting their potential, or form relationships that drain rather than multiply their power. I learned this principle through what initially appeared to be my greatest betrayal, but became my most valuable education about strategic relationships. I had formed what seemed like a perfect alliance with General Chen, whose forces complemented mine perfectly and whose strategic thinking I deeply respected. Together, we achieved a series of remarkable victories that neither could have accomplished alone. But I gradually discovered that our alliance was built on a fundamental misunderstanding. I believed we were partners working toward compatible long-term objectives. He believed he was using our temporary cooperation to advance goals that directly contradicted my core interests. When the truth emerged, our alliance didn't just end, it transformed me from his most valuable supporter into his most dangerous opponent. This painful experience taught me the difference between useful partnerships and dangerous dependencies. Useful partnerships multiply your capabilities while preserving your independence. Dangerous dependencies appear to strengthen you while actually making you vulnerable to others. Decisions and changeable loyalties. I developed what I call the alliance audit, a systematic evaluation of every significant relationship in my life. Did this person increase my capabilities or limit them? Did our association make me stronger or more vulnerable? Did they have genuine aligned interests or merely temporary convenient cooperation? The strongest alliances I formed were with people whose success genuinely required my success, and whose values aligned with mine even when our specific objectives differed. These relationships survived conflicts, misunderstandings, and changing circumstances because they were built on foundations deeper than immediate convenience. But I also learned that sometimes isolation is the strongest position. When surrounded by people who drain your energy, compromise your values, or distract you from your essential objectives, choosing solitude preserves your power for more productive applications. The seal that opens doors also knows when those doors should remain closed. I discovered that building the right network requires both the wisdom to recognize valuable allies and the courage to distance yourself from relationships that weaken you. Many people remain weak because they're afraid to be alone, so they accept relationships that diminish rather than enhance their capabilities. The most powerful alliances share several characteristics. First, mutual benefit that doesn't require sacrifice of core principles. Second, complementary strengths that create capabilities neither party possesses alone. Third, shared values that survive temporary disagreements about tactics or timing. Fourth, genuine respect that makes betrayal psychologically difficult. I learned to distinguish between allies, partners, and tools. Allies share your fundamental values and long-term vision. Partners share specific objectives for defined periods. Tools serve immediate tactical purposes without deeper connection. Each type of relationship requires different approaches and different levels of trust and investment. Sometimes the strongest strategic move is refusing alliances that others consider essential. When proposed partnerships would compromise your principles, limit your options, or create dangerous dependencies, the power to say no becomes your greatest strength. I also discovered that reputation for being a valuable ally attracts better partnership opportunities than desperate pursuit of any available relationship. When you're known for enhancing others' capabilities while maintaining your own integrity, people seek you out rather than you chasing them. The diplomatic seal works both ways. It opens doors you want opened and keeps closed doors that protect your essential interests. Master strategic relationships, and you'll find that the right alliances multiply your power exponentially while the wrong ones never form, because you've developed the wisdom to recognize and avoid them. True strength sometimes means standing alone until you find companions worthy of your trust and capable of genuine partnership. The undrawn sword that remains sheathed taught me that the greatest strength is the strength that never needs to be used. Most people believe power must be demonstrated through conflict and struggle, but I discovered that true mastery makes opposition impossible rather than merely defeatable. I learned this principle during what became my most famous non-battler confrontation that ended before it began, through superior strategic positioning rather than superior force. Enemy forces had been assembling for months, building toward what everyone expected would be the largest military engagement of the decade. Conventional wisdom suggested that victory would require matching their preparations with equal or greater force, but I had been studying their situation from a completely different perspective. Instead of preparing to defeat them in battle, I had been systematically eliminating their reasons for wanting battle in the first place. Instead of building strength to overcome their opposition, I had been removing the foundations that made opposition seem necessary or beneficial to them. The breakthrough came when I realized that their aggressive preparations were actually defensive reactions to what they perceived as threats to their essential interests. They weren't seeking conquest for its own sake. They were trying to protect something they valued and believed was endangered. Once I understood their real motivations, I could address those concerns directly. I sent communications that demonstrated complete understanding of their actual fears and legitimate needs. I proposed arrangements that would secure what they truly wanted while eliminating what they genuinely feared. I showed them how cooperation would achieve their objectives more effectively than conflict ever could. Most importantly, I positioned myself as the solution to their problems rather than an additional problem requiring a solution. Instead of being an obstacle to their success, I became essential to their success. Instead of being someone they needed to defeat, I became someone they needed to protect. The transformation was remarkable. The same armies that had been preparing to destroy me became invested in my well-being. The same leaders who had considered me their greatest threat began treating me as their most valuable ally. Complete victory without a single weapon drawn, without a single life lost, without a single lasting resentment created. This experience taught me that the supreme excellence is subduing the enemy without fighting, because there is no enemy left to subdue. When you understand people's deeper motivations and address their real concerns, opposition dissolves into cooperation. When you become essential to others' success, attacking you becomes self-defeating for them. I developed what I call the inevitability strategy, building positions so advantageous that opposition becomes pointless rather than merely difficult. This requires thinking several moves ahead, understanding others' true motivations, and creating situations where your success serves everyone's interests. The strongest people I've known rarely engage in obvious conflicts because they've eliminated the conditions that make conflicts necessary. They build reputations and positions so compelling that others naturally want to support them rather than oppose them. They create value that makes their success valuable to others. This doesn't mean avoiding all challenges or conflicts. It means choosing your battles so wisely that most potential opponents become allies instead. It means building strength so complete that using it becomes unnecessary. It means positioning yourself so advantageously that others seek your cooperation rather than your defeat. When you master this principle, you discover that true power lies not in your ability to win fights, but in your ability to make fighting unnecessary. The undrawn sword remains sharp because it never needs to be used, preserved for the rare occasions when all other approaches have been exhausted. Victory without battle is the ultimate expression of strategic superiority, achieving everything you want while allowing others to achieve what they truly need. The fortress gate that has never been breached taught me that mental strength is the foundation upon which all other power rests. Most people build impressive external capabilities while leaving their minds vulnerable to doubt, fear, manipulation, and defeat. But I learned that an unassailable mental position makes you unstoppable regardless of external circumstances. I discovered this principle during the darkest period of my career, when political enemies had stripped away my official position, my resources, my allies, and my reputation. According to every external measure, I was finished, powerless, isolated, apparently defeated. But something remarkable happened during this period of supposed weakness. I realized that my true strength had never depended on external factors at all. In my enforced solitude, I conducted what I called the fortress inspection, a systematic examination of my mental foundations to understand what could and couldn't be taken from me. I discovered that while external power can be removed by others, internal power can only be surrendered by yourself. While others can control your circumstances, only you can control your response to those circumstances. I began building what I called the inner citadel, a mental fortress so strong that no external force could penetrate it. This wasn't about denial or avoiding reality, but about creating internal strength that remained unshaken regardless of what happened externally. The first wall of this fortress was absolute clarity about what was and wasn't within my control. I stopped wasting mental energy on things I couldn't influence and concentrated all my power on things I could direct. This immediately ended the internal conflicts that had been draining my strength and focus. The second wall was immunity to others' opinions and judgments. I realized that most of my mental weakness came from allowing others to define my worth, my capabilities, and my future possibilities. I developed the practice of evaluating myself against my own standards rather than others' expectations or limitations. The third wall was mastery over my emotional responses. Instead of being controlled by fear, anger, disappointment, or excitement, I learned to use these emotions as information while maintaining control over my actions and decisions. Emotions became data rather than dictators. The fourth wall was unshakable commitment to my core principles, regardless of external pressures. I identified the values and beliefs that defined who I was at the deepest level, and I built my identity around these foundations rather than around temporary roles, relationships, or circumstances. The fifth wall was strategic patience combined with tactical flexibility. I learned to maintain long-term vision while adapting to short-term realities, never losing sight of ultimate objectives, while remaining responsive to immediate necessities. During my period of external powerlessness, these mental fortifications made me stronger than I had ever been when surrounded by conventional power. I discovered that true confidence comes from internal competence rather than external validation. Real security comes from mental discipline rather than favorable circumstances. When opportunities for external power returned, I was no longer dependent on them for my sense of strength or worth. This independence made me far more effective because I wasn't operating from desperation, fear, or need for approval. I could make decisions based on strategic wisdom rather than emotional weakness. I developed daily practices that maintained and strengthened these mental fortifications. Each morning, I would remind myself of what was within my control that day, and release concern about everything else. Each evening, I would review how well I had maintained my mental discipline and where improvements were needed. The unstoppable mindset isn't about believing you can't fail, it's about knowing you can handle any failure. It isn't about avoiding all difficulties, it's about being stronger than any difficulty you encounter. It isn't about controlling all outcomes, it's about controlling your response to any outcome. Master mental fortification, and you become truly unstoppable because your power no longer depends on external factors that others can manipulate or circumstances can change. The eternal torch that has burned for centuries, passed from master to student, represents the moment when ancient wisdom becomes your personal power. Everything I have shared with you, every principle, every strategy, every hard-won insight, becomes part of your journey from weakness to unstoppable strength. Let me be direct with you about what lies ahead. You now possess knowledge that most people will never discover, principles that have guided the strongest leaders and strategists throughout history, but knowledge alone changes nothing. The gap between knowing these truths and living them is where most people remain forever weak, understanding what they should do, but never actually doing it. Your transformation begins with a fundamental choice that only you can make. Will you continue living as someone who feels powerless when it matters most? Or will you commit to becoming someone who cannot be moved, cannot be stopped, cannot be defeated by any external circumstance? If you choose the path of strength, here is your roadmap. Begin with the foundation. Know yourself with ruthless honesty. Spend 1 week conducting your own inventory of self, identifying your patterns, your triggers, your weaknesses, and your untapped strengths. This self-knowledge becomes your strategic advantage in every situation you'll face. Next, conquer the enemy within. Practice the interrogation of fear, transforming every anxious thought into a planning opportunity, every doubt into a question that demands a solution. Build your mental fortress, one wall at a time, establishing immunity to others' opinions, mastery over your emotions, an unshakable commitment to your core principles. Master strategic positioning in every area of your life. In conversations, position yourself where you can observe everyone while remaining strategically central. In career decisions, position yourself where opportunities flow to you naturally. In relationships, position yourself where you add value while maintaining your independence. Develop your timing sense by practicing the art of strategic patience combined with decisive action. Learn to read the signs of ripeness in every situation, understanding when to wait for optimal conditions and when to strike with lightning speed. Build your network of strategic alliances, but remember that sometimes isolation is the strongest position. Form relationships that multiply your capabilities while preserving your core integrity. Distance yourself from connections that drain your energy or compromise your principles. Practice the supreme excellence of victory without battle by understanding others' true motivations and positioning yourself as essential to their success. Build such compelling value that others naturally want to support you rather than oppose you. Apply these principles consistently for 90 days, and you will begin to see the transformation. Others will respond to you differently because you will be different. Opportunities will appear because you'll be positioned to recognize and capture them. Challenges will strengthen you because you'll have the tools to transform obstacles into advantages. After 6 months of consistent practice, these principles will become instinctive. You'll find yourself naturally thinking strategically, positioning advantageously, timing optimally, and responding with the kind of strength that commands respect and achieves results. After 1 year, you will have become the person others look to for leadership, the person who remains calm under pressure, the person who finds solutions when others see only problems. You will have transformed from someone who feels weak into someone who is genuinely unstoppable. But remember this, with great power comes great responsibility. Use these principles to build rather than destroy, to protect rather than exploit, to serve something greater than your own immediate interests. The strongest people throughout history have been those who used their power to benefit others and advance worthy causes. The eternal torch now passes to you. Carry it with honor, use it with wisdom, and when the time comes, pass it to others who need the light of these ancient truths applied to modern challenges. Your journey from weakness to unstoppable strength begins now. The path is clear, the principles are proven. The only question remaining is whether you will walk it. I believe you will, because you have already taken the first step by seeking this knowledge. Now take the second step by applying it. Then the third by persisting through initial difficulties. Then the fourth by celebrating your first victories. Continue step by step until you reach the destination where true strength awaits. The battlefield has changed from ancient China to your modern life, but the foundations of unstoppable power remain eternal. Make them yours.